Brilliant. So we're live. Over to you.
All right.
I'll let Andrew.
Daniel, do you take the lead? Yeah.
G'day, everyone. So Dan and I want to make this more or less a participatory undertaking. So there's no slides. We're going to basically try to figure out how OWASP and the DevSecOps community can actually work together to identify gaps within the tooling that's missing, or other knowledge base, or whatever the case may be, and those things that we should work on as a matter of priority. So over the next couple of hours, we will basically step through what are the projects that we do have, what do you need more or less, because some of those projects are basically either outdated, wrong, you'd never heard of them before, therefore you don't use them. And then let's prioritize what we might want to do. And so, Dan, I know you've got a lot of notes, so do you want to just go through what your objectives would be?
Sure, thanks. The topic of CI/CD pipelines have become quite popular at the moment. And I think if we go back to the early days, they were clunky, they were awful. Jenkins springs to mind. I'm not a fan of Jenkins. But we've actually seen a lot of R&D that goes into R&D pipelines and CI/CD pipelines. It's really exciting. I guess the problem that we've got at the moment is that a lot of those tools that fit into pipelines are commercial tools, and as such do limit the amount of people that can benefit from such automated pipelines to look for code quality, code conformity, policy as code, security testing, and so on. Now, what we wanted to do with the OWASP pipelines is Andrew and I said, right, if this was a brand new pipeline, right, you are a new startup or a company that doesn't have a lot of budget, but you still want to make sure that the code that you're shifting is secure and robust and conforms, what do you do? And I think that's where OWASP can step in. At the moment, there are quite a few OWASP projects that sort of lend well into automated pipelines, or there's also gaps where OWASP doesn't actually cover. So what we wanted to do with this session, the next 2 hours or just under 2 hours, is say, right, for each of the stages of a pipeline, so from commit, actions, build, notify, inspect, notify, and launch, what are we missing? Or what do we currently have that could be made better? So for example, OWASP SAP, great DAS-based tool, not the easiest to integrate, right? Lovely tool, but it does need work on making it so it's very easy to integrate. Or dependency check, great tool, known false positives, which is a big problem when you're trying to deploy it. So where can we put time and effort? Where can people who are looking for something to do over the summer put their effort in? And generally, how do we start to make a fully free and open source pipeline that doesn't exclude anybody who doesn't have vast amounts of money to build pipelines? So what I'd love, and I know what Andrew would love, is kind of for people to say out like, hey, we've tried to do X, it doesn't work, or you're really missing this, or why doesn't it do this type thing? So over to everybody else, really.
Yeah, let's do a little round of intros. I did that at the beginning of the last session, and it was really nice to find out what people want to achieve out of this session. So I think, Dan, you and I can go last because everyone should really possibly even knows this already. I'll just do it in the order that we can see on the screen. So Dennis, can you just give us the 30-second intro to Dennis Cruz?
So my focus, right, on this session and on here is since I'm now a VP of engineering, I actually lead engineering teams, but also I'm a CISO, but I'm also leading engineering teams. I'm focused on how do I get my teams to use these tools, right, and use the OWASP resources, and how to make it scale, right, and I get my main requirement is that I could show the tools to teams, I can show the guides, but there's still a massive ramp up, right? We need those 5 layers, right, of even that pipeline, so that the teams can join in at each of those different levels. So my focus now is on how to make this scale, how to get my teams to adopt security, because you don't have to convince the CISO, you don't have to convince the organization that security is important. So you got a nice open road. The question is how to make it work in the real world of development.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Cillian, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is it Cillian or Cillian?
It's Killian Lyons here. Hi, how are you?
Good.
So my short introduction is I'm an information assurance professional, come from an infrastructure background. Current role is in a cloud security architect position. So like Dennis, I've been looking at it from both sides and trying to get an end-to-end solution in terms of looking at from the frameworks all the way through to the tools and the pipelines. So I'm keen to see the OWASP projects, look at what's there, and hopefully able to provide some insight if I can. Cheers.
Okay. Yep, no problems. Thank you. Enrico.
Hi there. I joined the session to see if somebody else has issues with the stability in the pipelines, the AppSec pipelines, because this is one of my main concerns. I got everything running if I wanted, no issues at all. I got them integrated in developer pipelines. Everything is okay, but then the tests either just crash or are not available anymore, and so stability is a big issue for me, at least. Not necessarily for everybody else, but for me it is. So thought I'd join the session and check if somebody else has a good tip or two on how they do it. Because I love to work with Docker containers. Every open source tool I use should run in a Docker container, so it's easy to replace if version updates, you know what I mean? And yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, cool. Robbie Molson.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Just will start with Daniel. He mentioned stuff about OWASP ZAP and the problem integrating it in the CI/CD. And actually, to be honest, I'm in the process right now. So yeah, so it's a pain, I would say. I'm principal security application engineer, Mimecast. So basically, our focus more on my team on application security. Let's say right now we manage to, let's say, integrate a lot of SaaS tool, basically commercial. Now in the process now to get DAS tool and IS tools. I see a lot of potentials in the OWASP products, or I would say tools, and I'll see whether we'll be able to integrate it in our CI/CD environment. So I see the potential. So that's the main requirement or main focus and objective of attending the session.
Okay, great. So it sounds like you're a practitioner who's actually trying to use these tools, and
yes,
it's difficult. So maybe we could work.
And we are interested in dependency analysis, but we've got now Black Duck and it's doing well. But it's always better to invest in different directions, like open source, commercials, and see. It's like bridging some gaps actually.
Okay, cool. Francesco Cipollone.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, very much.
Hey, Andrew. Hey, Dennis. Hey, Daniel. Good to see you guys back.
Yeah.
So I guess we touch point on vulnerability management. I'm coming from, I was heading up the application security for HSBC, and we were rolling out a full-blown program to integrate tools, and we managed up to a point to integrate commercial tool to the CI/CD, including dependency checks. So my interest is to see how everything strings up together, what other people's opinions are, and specifically one element that I saw missing is shifting from just integration of the tool down to the vulnerability management and how effectively we prioritize vulnerabilities across the board, and how we tied in effectively the concept of people that commit and people that look at things rather than just code, because that's in a large scale. I was managing 7,000 developers, and in a scale like that, linking effectively not just code, but who actually commit, who actually delivered code, and what vulnerability popped from there, how to prioritize that in terms of if you have 1,200 applications, how to bump up and down the vulnerability link to the application, or how to link from a CMDB perspective, application and code, instead of just stringing it. And I had some discussion with Dennis in the past, I think a couple of months ago, on how some ideas bring this thing together. So happy to share either here or afterwards, if I can, some stuff that we did on Git to link the committers to what we're doing and to string the vulnerability together.
Yeah. So I mean,
I know it's a lot of stuff.
no, it's the scale thing is actually very interesting. I had a chat with a large French financial institution, CISO, a couple of years ago, and he was also mentioning scale as being one of the problems that he had. He had like 1,400 apps and didn't know who was developing what. And also one of the challenges he had was that people were putting things into the cloud and he had even less visibility than the CMDB. So he's always, that was an interesting conversation eye-opener for me in particular. Cool. We'll keep on going on. We've got Niels H. Okay, just joined. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes. Jonathon, just with Jonathon.
Hi, sorry, I was unmuting. So I've been initially started in software engineering, moved into application security about 15, 16 years ago, working for over the years, working for 2 different product companies with their engineering teams on trying to secure the products better. As with all things, initially it started quite late in the development stage, and as we got better, or as we tried to be more effective, tried to move left. With regards to pipelines, etc., I'm very interested in eliminating just whole sets or whole classes of issues, but I know that there is not generally one single right approach for that. So it may be, for one class of vulnerability, it may be a DAS tool. For another class of vulnerability, it may be a SAS tool. Then we run into the issues of false positives, and if tools are too noisy, they just get turned off, etc. So that's an area that I've been thinking about and exploring for a while. I don't have any particular answers there, though. I don't think there is one answer or one tool that one size fits all.
Sure. Okay, good. Jonathon Strong.
Hi, I'm quite new to the AppSec world, so I'm mostly here to kind of listen to a lot more of the experienced people. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot to take away from it and everything, but coming from more of a vulnerability management background recently. So.
Okay. So one of the things that was in my previous session was about awareness and finding out and discovering the tools that are available. So any insights you can have on actually how you might have gone, like throughout the session, that is, on how you might have gone and discovered things, that'd be very helpful for us, because, it's one thing to have the tool, but then if no one knows about it and doesn't use it, then it's pretty pointless as well. Yeah, cool, thank you. Tolga.
Hi, everyone. I'm today here as a developer and mostly as a PhD student. So I'm currently researching ideas similar to what the OWASP App Sensor project does. So what my interest here today in this meeting is is this concept still of relevance, and if it is it underutilized, and how can we make best use of it for such that it gets more adopted by developers or the applications they work on?
Okay. We might delve into what you use the OWASP Sensor project later, but we'll just get through the introductions now. I must admit, I have skipped Andre Ferreira several times by accident. So Andre.
Hi guys, good afternoon. I'm Andre, a long-time developer, a cybersecurity master, but not a security practitioner. I'm here to learn from the practitioners, understand your worries, your concerns, what is current, and contribute if I can.
Okay, thank you. Thomas F. Might have some audio issues.
Sorry, I was looking for my mute button. Hey guys. So I'm mostly working with the AppSec right now. I do a lot of things, but right now I'm doing some AppSec work. And when it comes to CI/CD pipeline, one of the things that I've been trying to look at is how to make the customer's life a little bit easier. And by customer, I'm referring to developers, of course. One of the things that I keep running into is when you're onboarding new teams or new developers, there's always that question. It's like, what do I do with these reports? What do I do with these vulnerabilities? Why are you blocking my code? Why can't I release my code? Why do I have to do this? And at times I find that some of the things that are coming out, especially out of the tools that we use, tend to be not intuitive or not good enough for, or not easy enough for developers to interpret, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the problems when we have tools that are generally consumed by a security team that can be a little bit opaque to developers who are actually the people who need to understand them. I understand that one perfectly. Okay, thank you. Dominic.
Hello, guys. Yeah, I'm doing my master's thesis right now in cybersecurity, and basically I just saw the link in the Slack channel, and I'm doing like benchmark testing for different open source and commercial web vulnerability scanners or scanners like this. And so for me, it's also interesting to see how DEVOPS pipelines work. And that's why I'm here, and get your opinion on it and maybe get an exchange.
Sure. I mean, that's an area that's fraught with danger because of license agreements saying you can't benchmark, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's one of the reasons why it's a little bit less than fantastic. Paul Gerard.
Hi, yeah, I'm a developer. And we're currently actively looking at integrating tooling into our CI/CD pipelines. So interesting to hear what everyone else's view on what's available and what we should be looking at.
Excellent. No worries. And I think that might be everyone. The 10-second version of me is I've been with OWASP since late 2001. I wasn't there at the beginning. I lead the OWASP Top 10 and ASVS projects. So I'm really quite big into standardization and helping people produce secure software. Dan.
I'm like Andrew, an old piece of furniture in OWASP with a couple of stains, and OWASP testing guide was my baby along with Mark's, and then ASVS since version 2, 3.
Yep.
Yeah, 2.
No, 2. Okay, cool. Dan, do you want to just lead the conversation for a bit? Because I've got some points, but I know that you have plenty of notes. I want to make sure we've got time for yours.
So I guess what I'd love to know from everybody, if we look at a modern pipeline today, right? So we've got effectively 8 phases. The first being commit. Once the code has been committed, we then do some kind of action. And that could be anything from looking at quality of the code, if the pipeline supports that, to dependencies, to containers, to DevOps, to SaaS, to AST, to IAX, whatever. And then we either build it and then go through into a DAST testing phase. And then finally, we go into a notify type phase. What I'd love to do is, if we look at all those different phases, maybe we can start discussing some of the tools that everybody's using, potentially commercial ones. I'm happy with that. I do use a lot of commercial tools as well, but also areas where you think right now something is glaring and missing from the OWASP lineup. Because it seems there's quite a few people in this channel already who are already doing this, not possibly for on the application side, but for either mobile dev or something else. I'd love to know, like, if you are looking to deploy now, what's the number one thing that you've gone, damn, it just doesn't exist. I don't have this. Why don't I have this? I'll do a first one. I mostly today use GitHub and Circle CI, right, as 2 of the main pipelines as such. So on the commit side, GitHub's put a lot of research and development into GitHub Actions, which I'm loving. And for me right now, it's kind of the benchmark because they've managed to iOSify the ability to add actions into a pipeline. Now, for somebody who's used Jenkins knows that it's not the most seamless approach. And I've got a big thing about UX design. GitHub Actions is phenomenal. Like, it's really easy to do this. So I guess on that point, what I'd love to see is somehow us either adding to the likes of Jenkins to make it a lot easier to add action style stuff and commit stuff, or are we barking up the wrong tree?
Daniel, what about the design phase? You jump directly into the commit, into the, or you don't want to, or you want to exclude that part?
That's a whole different kettle of fish. I don't mind bringing here.
I'll tell you what we did from that is a feedback loop. So in the session, so we organized an AppSec program that effectively did SAST and DAST fundamentally alternatively on a weekly basis, and then measure the results and sprint planning on a Monday and retrospective on a Friday. One thing that's worked at scale really massively was really beneficial is creating a library of how to fix things. So what we've seen in the code, what did wrong, what did we discuss? So kind of a retrospective, and we start building a library of retrospective from open source libraries or effectively dependency checks and code itself. And one good thing was, for example, a good story. 15 project had dependency, sorry, not dependency check, input validation. But just using one of the OWASP library just for basic parsing, 15 project managed with 30 minutes conversation to fix a hell of a lot of bugs. And we documented in the library, and more I start looking at that. So we start monitoring, for example, the page view of each of those libraries to determine which is the most common issue. Not from the tool itself, but that was effectively almost a zero false positive detection of what was the common thing. And that's what I said while building, because that was shift in the design phase where people looking at the library could avoid even running the scan, because say if a tool or if I had some doubts on how to do certain things, or because my SBS told me certain things, or because my security guy said input validation is important, search on Jira or search on Confluence, pop in the page, look at that, and know at least a little bit about it.
So I get that, but see, for me, let's say we're starting from a brand new pipeline, right? Which everybody here is. That what you've just described there is very much a mature pipeline, right? Because that's my notifier stage, right?
Yeah.
I already have a data source where I can look at previous builds, both defects and passes and everything else, and say, right, over the last 6 months, we shipped and pushed a lot of code, but we had a problem with our containers, right? We weren't doing vulnerability management. You can then take all that data and go back, like you said, in the feedback loop to the start of it. Problem is, you don't have that. If you don't have a pipeline to start, like, you need to start somewhere. And I guess that's why I've not included it here. I've gone under the assumption that this is a brand new pipeline, right? A lot of people are now saying, hey, this could work. And it could either be on-prem or in the cloud. A lot of people are moving to the cloud-based ones. So we're now saying, right, from right now, I have written my first Flutter app. I feel like a complete hipster. My jeans are very tight. I'm going into the App Store, and by God, I'm going to be a trillionaire. What do I do? Right? And that's the git commit, git push. What happens next? So I fully agree with you. I love the idea of the telemetry, the analysis, the historical analysis. We've done this in the past. We need to fix it now. But just park that until we get to that notify phase.
Gotcha.
Well, so Dan, one of the things that I was thinking about even before we got to commit stage was IDE helpers, threat modeling tools, and others that do help in that design and architecture, as well as whilst you're actually coding. So, I mean, even basic things like IntelliSense comments that basically say this is a deprecated API or whatever is a helpful tool. As well before actions at commit level.
So out of interest then, I like that. I love threat modeling, I really do. Threat modeling doesn't necessarily fit into modern pipelines.
No. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. It fits in the design. So I kind of punch for the precursor of this is I kind of punch PCM and OWASP together and trying to make it work inside a bigger framework that includes design as well. Because I think in a lot of things, the two are completely disconnected, and the threat modeling is still relegated in the design phase. While it's, for me, is more of a circular thing. So whatever I learn from the pipeline, I feed it back into the design phase. That is missed by a lot of tools. And I didn't like, for example, of some that it lean as a governance as almost a separate element. Well, my framework, I put governance underneath all of it.
So I agree with that. I actually pushed out a tweet earlier on this week. I do a lot of hardware, and nature of hardware,
I get lost on your hardware tweets.
Yeah, we have bill of materials, which makes life easier. And it's really easy when you want to do some random project. You go to the component you want to use, and there's this amazing data, and it tells you everything about this small little component. And it's sad that I remember having this chat in Washington with Jeff Williams and a few others about having some kind of warning label like you do on food to say, right, this application makes use of these libraries, it does this, it does that, blah, 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 blah. And that must have been 15 years ago.
Yeah,
that was a
long time ago. And I almost feel like if we could somehow automate this, and there was a good thread on Twitter that kind of came out of that, as part of the design phase, I'm building an application. I'm going to use Flutter again, right? I'm building an application that's going to run on iOS, Android, and a web app. I'm going to use Flutter. It's going to use Dart, and it's going to have all these dependencies. And somehow we can automate that, either using Markdown or something else, that as part of the build, you have the design, you then have design as code, right? So that we at least have an idea of how the application talks, what it's talking to. I know somebody earlier mentioned cloud. Again, part of the main threat modeling thing is you'd say, right, I'm running this application in the cloud, or it's going to be talking to a cloud endpoint. If we could somehow take that and build it as code so that every single time a push happens, right, you might say, I've got an action that says, if an endpoint in the cloud is picked, we need to make sure that the endpoint is correctly documented, right? Or there's an explanation, or there's some kind of control around that. I don't know if that's too much of a dream right now.
Can I ask you one thing, though? Aren't we jumping the gun? So you mentioned the maturity and a mature pipeline. We went from 0 to hero very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I relegate that element. I relegate that element in a very. I wasn't even introducing that in a medium to high maturity model, because that is the nirvana of things. So that's why I kept on.
So Daniel, can we go back to the GitHub Actions?
Basic.
Right? And by the way, there was a great session throughout the summits, which I highly recommend you guys to join. And actually, there's a session happening right after this on the COVID Safe Paths app, where it's an open source app. We're collaborating with them. They're the guys, I think, Daniel, you were part of it. There was a tweet about, they were saying how they use ASPS and the testing guide. And actually, one of the sessions we did yesterday was about adding labels to the COVID app, which again, I think you might find very interesting. But let's go back to the GitHub Actions, right? You know, as somebody who's actually been a very big champion of OWASP, right, and has pushed OWASP everywhere I've been to, right? For me, the thing that is really missing is two components, right? Is the very small nugget of a test that delivers one thing really well, and the automation of that test, right? And I don't like the idea that we're talking about an immature app versus a mature app versus a mature team. The way I look at the steps are always the same, right? The only difference is an immature team will take more time to do things than a mature or more expert developer teams or DevOps. They can adopt things faster, but the steps are still always the same. You always start small, you always test it out, you deploy it. So when you talk about the GitHub Actions, right? In fact, I got my team to adopt GitHub Actions because they were over engineering certain things. It's not that I actually think GitHub Actions might be the end goal, but it actually has a nice, it's like Travis, which was also really good, but it's now at GitHub, right? So, and the thing about this, right, is you have to make sure that whatever you do is customized to the end result, right? The problem with ASPS, the problem with a lot of our guides, is they literally are a dart on a chunk of technology. Look, my dev teams don't care about that, right? They care about C# version X with these APIs, with this thing, with that environment. If it's not in context, it's too abstract, right? So what we need is actually libraries and libraries, right, of mini components, which are actually a gigantic graph, right? Because that's how they should connect, that actually deliver one thing really well. So if you can add one test to your pipeline, that's a success, right? Just get every project to break down what they do into one thing, and then a series of things, right? And that one test is super complicated to put into place because sometimes you have to figure out lots of things. But I feel that going to GitHub Actions, right? It's a great place, and there's a great marketplace to do that. So you should be able to go OWASP X, and then almost like OWASP project test X, right? And that will allow you to put that test in place, right? And that will allow us to put our guides, allow to put our technology, our workflows, our tools in a way that can be integrated into a pipeline, knowing that, they'll ask more questions, they add more things, but you bring that to the level of something that is super relevant to one team, one context.
I love this. How many in the room have actually heard of or played with the GitHub Actions in the last 6 months?
Raise your hands. You can raise your hands on Zoom. Go up.
One, two.
Not a few.
Come on, Paul. So Paul is from my team. You haven't played. You've seen it.
Look, I think one thing, what Dennis is saying is true. What I love about the change of how we see pipelines today, maybe 2 years ago, we viewed a pipeline as this big clunky beast, and genuinely there were a few players in the pipeline, and they were mostly commercial, and they did everything. I'm not going to name the names because I'm tired of legal departments coming after me. Some of those tools are bad, and they're legacy tools. What GitHub managed to do well is they've not completely reinvented the world. They've done very much what Apple did with iOS. Apple never built the first mobile phone. They just made it a lot easier to use. And that's what I'm finding with GitHub's approach. Not only is the UX really good, but also actions. And if you look at the amount of actions that are popped up in the marketplace, it's like 3,000, 3,500 when I last checked. They've made it really, really easy to do incredibly single one tasks. And I love that, what Dennis said. In my mind, I might be completely wrong, a pipeline today is like the spinal cord, right? You have a rough idea of what you want from the pipeline. I do not want to ship really bad code. And as such, we're going to have gates and various controls. But a modern pipeline should be able to have parts come in and come out depending on the code base. And I think this is one of the big things I've noticed with all the engineering projects I'm involved in. Where I work right now, I'm not going to say it on YouTube, we have every damn single language you can imagine, all the way back to mainframes. You want every single language, we got it. There is no such tool that does everything. So what we need is a pipeline that's, hey, all right, I'm writing it in COBOL. Can somebody get the 94-year-old out of the closet? Because there's only about 7 people that now write COBOL in the world. And we need to put that into a pipeline. Or, hey, we're doing a lot of stuff in Rust. Right, really good, secure, solid language. Okay, we need to do this. And that's for me where I love what GitHub is doing with Actions, and we could take a lot of inspiration from, where if we could offer these single tools that fit into Actions, that would be very cool, because that means adoption becomes really widespread. So if you've not looked at GitHub Actions, I'd seriously have a look, because it's very, very cool what they're doing.
So pushing Action to commercial tool to any kind of pipeline.
Yeah.
Because
so what GitHub did was they productized. They commoditize the actions. For the ones who haven't seen the Worldly Map sessions of the summit, I highly recommend you to do it, because what GitHub did is a case study of commoditizing something that was a gigantic attrition on the market and creating a new market on top of it. So we know that this is going to happen. And this is the thing, right? So I don't know how much you guys look at Worldly Maps, but it's freaking amazing, right? Because you can predict the future, right? Like you can predict the future when you have products competing, because you don't know which one's going to pop. But you know that every time that something gets commoditized, a new market emerges, new practices emerges, right? So we know that every time we commoditize something, every time we make something just work, there's a whole new ecosystem that pops up. So if you look at OWASP, we have tons of tools, tons of documents that are on either the custom build or the early product stage. We have to commoditize them. We have to make them easy to use, easy to consume, super nuggets, super consumability, and we have to take them where the ecosystem is. So the power of GitHub Actions is it runs on top of Docker, right? So it runs on top of containers. So once it runs in GitHub Actions, I can make it run in Travis. I can make it run in Google Code Build. I can make it run in Jenkins, right? It runs everywhere. But having that connection with the repo and the actions, and by the way, GitLab does very similar things, right? So GitLab in some ways is more mature, right, on the pipelines. But I think GitHub got the right sweet spot, which is, run something, put a YAML file that contains your definitions, runs inside the Docker, off you go. And by the way, if you haven't seen the latest GraphQL stuff that they're about to push, is amazing, because they're about to also push code scanning at the graph level on the commit, which is really, really cool, which again will scale static analysis quite spectacularly.
So I just want to take a step back for a tick, and I want to hear from the developers in the group. Dan, you mentioned that you want to have from essentially starting from scratch. And I think the idea of like an AppSec pipeline in a box for early adopters, like literally, I need to have something. How do I get from here to there in an approachable way? I'd really like to hear from our developer friends on this particular panel. What are the things that you would look for in a tool set, or call it an AppSec pipeline in a box? What are the things that you need that could address your current needs?
I guess I'll chip in is what we're doing at the moment. So the pipeline we've got at the moment, we've got a CI/CD pipelines in place. We've got multiple products that are going through them. But I think the checks and measures that is what we're lacking, and it's getting the analysis of the code, both static and possibly dynamic, getting metrics out of the code. And having that security net in place. You've got unit tests running, and we've got an element of integration tests running in available in some cases. But I think this is the sector that we're currently, as in my intro, we're currently looking at is looking at the tooling that we can plug in to give us those checks and measures and the metrics out of the code base that's going in, and the changes that are going in specifically.
The metrics you just talked about, it's funny, I had a chat with GitHub this morning about that. What I'd love to see is if, let's say we have one repo and we've got hundreds of repos underneath that, is you almost want like a security scorecard for those repos, as in, right, we have lots of squads, lots of teams, right? Who's doing what? Do we have an area where a certain team is really good at the front end? When they're pushing back-end code, there's more and more vulnerabilities popping up, which highlights either a need for training, or is it the DevOps stuff? We're constantly using containers, but every single time we push a container, Claire's coming up saying, or Anchor, hey, listen, like these images are broken, right? They are 6 months out of date. Something like that, right? That says to either a squad leader or a project manager or somebody saying, this is the area you need to concentrate on. Like, here are the faults and the issues that are coming from your dev project. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And so it's got. So I was at a conference years ago now, but there was a Google test manager. I can't remember his name. Was giving a keynote speech, and he gave the metaphor of walking into a hospital, a doctor walking into a hospital ward, and he says that's really what what a doctor doesn't do when he's round is go through and do the full range of tests every time he does the rounds in the morning. What he does is he looks at a snapshot and a key metrics for each patient to see what the status of that patient was and where the trends were. And he says that's what he was trying to get out of his test methodology. What he wanted was a snapshot, so he'd take the key metrics of, say, code coverage and code complexity, and if he had modules that had low code coverage but high code complexity, then they direct resources into addressing those metrics to either include the coverage because the complexity was too high, or reduce the complexity. But without that kind of information, you're running blind. You can keep piling in functionality, and your tests will keep passing, but you need that view under the hood at a snapshot kind of thing to help guide the decision makings, I think.
I agree with Paul.
And look, I'll pass, right, the policy and the mandates once I have those metrics. I can't at the moment do that because I know that the overhead that I'm pushing to the team is too great. So as a senior security exec, I need those metrics so I can basically say, here's our benchmark. And here's the benchmark for certain type of teams. And we are using the pioneers, settlers, town planners, we need our MVPs, VPs, and Ps. So I actually need a standard for each of those. I need a standard for my early projects, a standard for my new generation products, and I need a standard for my SRE developed projects. And actually, there's another great conversation here. We talk about security budgets, and that's also important, right? It's important to take into account that most projects start on an insane, insecure level, and that's okay because they're still figuring out. So actually, but I need that rating, right? I need that label, right? Because without that label, I don't have an anchor to put a policy, right? So Paul, follow my team, right? Like I need to go to them and they need to actually, in a way, security then has a role to play, right? We have a role to play. Okay, not on that project. Yes, on that project. Yes, isolate this. Let's do that. So we can advise, but we need those labels, right?
So kind of a developer contract when you say this is the minimal bar that you need for MVP and the other and production effectively production for
right.
A fully blown live. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I think that could work.
So we've done that. So we basically have 3 levels of projects. We call MVP, minimum viable prototype, VP, viable product, and P, product. And the logic is that the engineering requirements, the quality requirements, the SLA requirements, and of course the security requirements are very different on one of them. And in fact, it's important that we start to share with our customers the level that it's important that our customer understand that this product is at VP level. So it has, for example, certain security gaps that our P project doesn't have, right? But it's okay if you run it, for example, in isolation. So it's very important that, again, there's a level of transparency. And Daniel, I think, and Andrew, I think the age, the time to put labels is now, right? I think we're ready. I think now is the moment where we really need to go down that direction, and the market is ready, and we need to be driving it.
I do love your doctor analogy, and I agree. I think what no pipeline so far I've seen or used is that eagle overview, right? My role as head of security engineering is I want to see where all the projects are going. I don't want to look at individual commits. I just don't have the time for that. But I want to see that, man, containers are a problem, or software dependencies, it's biting us in the arse. I don't know how you'd build that though, because that for me, it's almost like every single commit, every single thing that happens to that pipeline gets fed into some kind of database where you can then query that database.
Daniel, why don't we, so the stuff that we adopted was slightly different. So we start tracing the application to the application owner and start putting target to the application owner. Something like, we had 2 targets. We had double half quarter, double the number of release every quarter, and divide the number of incidents. That was a generic thing. And then I've introduced the half quarter. So divide the number of vulnerability across. You still get hit by the number of false positive, because as vulnerability, we called effectively the output of the SAST and the output of the dust. So you hit by a number of false positive, but that created a number of actions. So instead of looking at the macro, like you said, containers are okay, or this specific language are okay, you focus on the application itself.
A lot of the metrics that you look at are, again, going context specific. So we were talking earlier around on the guidance side. As an engineer, I would want something specific for Java 1.8 used in a web context with Spring. With some of the security stuff, again, it'll be those metrics or those KPIs will be context dependent based on your product, your technology, etc., etc. We could definitely come up with them, but I have a feeling they would vary.
If you if you use the suggestion, which I think Judith was floating earlier about labeling, and you go through the strata that we were suggesting with the MVP, VP, and P for products, then if you use the combination of those, you can really associate what different standards you want at each level and for a different type, and then that will give you that flexibility, wouldn't it?
High level framework, yeah, and then your metrics that you define would be organization, product, component specific.
Yeah.
And it almost comes back to it's a variation on what Dennis was saying. Rather than having a pluggable test or a small unit of test, you have a small unit of you have a set of pluggable KPIs that you can pull in. So okay, I'm running containers. I want how old am I, or when was the last date my containers were updated plugin. I'm going to set a threshold, but none of them, they should all be updated in the last 30 days.
See, that would be very cool. There's a lovely GitOps action that shouldn't be that hard to do at all. And God, I know so many that would need and are crying out for that, because it just doesn't exist. And not if you're not spending a lot of money on commercial tools.
Yeah. There's I mean, on the other side of things, you could sit on the SQLi side of things for Java. Yeah, number of uses of the API that doesn't use prepared statements. They may not be versus the prepared statement ones. Again, very specific, but in the right context, an incredibly useful metric if you're comparing lots of applications. If you have lots of applications that are in Java and you have 10 that only use prepared statements and 10 that don't, you may have a SQLi problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a concept that's similar to the paved road, where essentially, the idea of the paved road is, here is a set of things that work in a more secure fashion, use these and you'll be okay. Things that don't use the paved road get a lot more attention because they're not using the paved road. In terms of projects for OWASP, I've just been looking through for DevSecOps style projects, and there's not many actually. But one of the gaps that I see there is that we don't have a lot of paved road type projects. In fact, I couldn't find a single one. So what from your perspective with these sorts of metrics, it's obviously we need to have some sort of metrics program to be able to visualize. There are things like CodePulse, which do roughly what CodePulse does on GitHub, but fundamentally we need to have some sort of metrics program to be able to surface this. Is that what we're hearing?
I think it's part of it. You can, the metrics will shine light in particular areas. Depending on whether you have I'll say mature product or mature component, you may have a lot of security debt, in which case the metrics side of things is going to shine a light on where you need to put some engineering effort to resolve existing vulnerabilities. When it comes to new pipelines, if you can prevent I would personally focus more on preventing the issues getting in the first place, which relates back to the session that we were talking about earlier, the session this morning, where the focus is on initially awareness, education, and then tooling to prevent classes of issues getting in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the paved road concept we talked about earlier.
We already got the model, right? Look, if you take ASVS, testing guides, OpenSAM, proactive security controls, right? We got guidance coming out of our years, right? We have that really well, right? What we need is actionable guidance. right? That's what makes a difference. What makes a difference is taking a paragraph and making it into something like compliance as code, making it something that is testable. Until it's testable, it can't be measurable. It's that simple.
I agree with Dennis. One block that we had in the whole process is when it was written on paper and it was written on some. As soon as we converted that into a battery of tests, even customized tests, like you need to test for buffer input, even more for application-specific tests that the same developer did, because it was continuously, like similar to QA, click here, click here, click here. We can automate that. So as soon as you make a library of tests, you can automate, repeat, and measure. And the consistency was the key, because as soon as we linked the half quota, the divided number of vulnerability, everybody started paying attention with that, because it was measured and was measured against a team. So one big ask that we had was consistency. So having a library of tests released every number of weeks that we all agreed on for specific application of for specific language was critical. And I agree with Dennis. It's converting that into a battery of tests that you can execute consistently over and over and over. Otherwise, it's written on paper.
Yeah. So would for example, if OWASP had a project for OWASP GitHub Actions per language that they could implement and get some statistics out of, would that be helpful?
Statistics and base test, like input validation or these kind of things, what it translates into for specific language. So for Java, how do you parse a string? And how do you convert into a libraries of things? How do you check if a buffer create a buffer overflow? How do you check the memory stack overflow? How do you check all those OWASP top 10 things, and how you take from OWASP top 10 all the way down to tests, a battery of tests that you can execute, even if they are abstract, but then they can be adapted in action, they can be adapted in contrast, for example, in a battery of tests. And commercial tools have something similar. So it's effectively just a number of scripts. Even if we use NetHacker, for example, to execute this battery of tests, that could be the closest thing to a dust that we could automate. So a library of tests that we could link to NetHacker and use that as a dust. And
it doesn't have. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, finish that.
It doesn't have to be with the pipeline. It doesn't have to be a test. If you have an action that there's an API that's risky or vulnerable, or going back to Microsoft with their early SDLC stuff, they had they banned a set of unsafe APIs, and it just wouldn't compile with them. That's not a test per se, but the build would fail, or it would prevent a check-in. It achieves the same end goal, and it's just the end goal of the vulnerability, or the class of vulnerability, not ending up in your code. So
Jonathon, for me, that's a test, right?
Okay, fair enough.
Right, is something that has a criteria, is executed, has a result, right? Whether it's a unit test, integration test, doesn't matter, right? When you do a manual check, that's a test. But a manual check, that is ephemeral, disappear, so, doesn't scale, right?
Agreed. I'm not talking about manual tests, but things like pre-commit hooks, where you can argue it's a test. I don't really consider it a test in the perspective of we're into nomenclature. It doesn't matter.
It is a test, man. The only difference is where you execute it, right? If you execute on pre-commit hooks, it's before it gets sent. If you execute as part of the GitHub Actions, it's part of the pipeline. But it's still a test. It's still a repeatable process of validate an assumption, which is everything that ASVS and the testing guide and everything else is a set of requirements, inputs and outputs, right?
But that's from a lower maturity. If you automate it, then it's measurable and then it's scalable.
Yeah,
I think provided we're using the same language, it's all good. So I'm happy to call it a test. Rephrasing it then, it's a case of using the appropriate place for the test in the pipeline that achieves the goal or the end result that you want, is all I want to make sure that we do.
The only thing I would say, Andrew, you talk about metrics. I think metrics are a red herring here, right? Because we need to be hooking into whatever metrics they already have, right? And the beauty of being a test is that you naturally will fit into whatever they have.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I was hearing here is that we've got different maturity levels, and yes, we should have a library of tests. There's no doubt about that. I think the previous session that was at the same time as the one that I was running, hopefully that will translate out into some tests that can be adopted. No two programs are identical. Like a Flutter program is not a Java program, is not like an Android program of some description. We need to be able to have some sort of ability for people to come in at a low level, like a minimum viable DevOps SecOps program, get going, and then they get towards a sort of a nominal program where we expect most people to be. And then we've got unicorn programs where people have got extensive budgets, time and whatnot, and they've been doing this for some time. So it sounds like we sort of need to have that sort of scalability. If we try to boil the ocean and say we're trying to do the unicorn for everyone, I don't think we'll succeed at this.
No, because it goes back to almost ASVS. It goes back to OWASP top 10. So we abstract. So I think what I'm getting at from all the session and what I had in my mind is very, very specific tests. So even if we don't cover everything, for example, I did a benchmark of which one were the majority of language that were developed. And I'm in a situation similar to Daniel, where I had every language on earth, literally, but I saw that the 80% of the code was developed in Java. So we started developing a battery of tests for Java specific stuff. And maybe it doesn't cover all the tests, but it covers me the majority of stuff from a front-end perspective and from a middleware perspective. So I know that at least in a specific range of years is going to address that. And if we have a battery of tests that could be written on paper, like Dennis was saying, or even better, it could be automated in certain ways or forms, like an input validation, a fuzzing, any kind of things that we could automate, at least the basic, and integrate with tools that already exist, like NetHacker. That could be really, really valuable.
One thing that I would like to see myself, which I didn't come across at least, was that in behavior-driven development, if you could actually have cases or use cases or user stories where you would actually have security-related stories that you could just bring in, I think it probably make the business analyst life a bit easier, because those tend to be more business-focused rather than, technology-focused, although they will have conversations with the agile development team. They will not necessarily have somebody from security unless it was already done before. So I think that could actually bring some value to the table as well.
Yes and no. So we tested that environment and it turned out to be really, really generic. And people start moaning about it because it was so generic for any kind of language that it turned out to be a battery of useless tests. The only benefit of that piece of program was that it makes you think about all the possible scenarios. So kind of it takes you to a threat model, but it's cumbersome, and we saw at scale people avoiding it.
There's an interesting white elephant, right, that tends to be here, elephant in the room, which I actually think we should embrace, which is, when you take into account that we're going to go into testing, one of the biggest problems you have is most dev teams, or a lot of dev teams, don't have a mature test environment, right? And I actually think that we shouldn't shy away from it. In fact, I think we should embrace that and almost view that as added value of security. And the reason this is so critical is that a security team cannot do what we want to do without a good test environment, where the developer team can actually do what they're supposed to do without a test environment, sorry. So we need a test environment to run our tests. They don't need a test environment to run their code. Now, you could argue that you should not code without a test environment. In a real world, right, that's not what happens, right? In a real world, the time and the application budget to test environment is very small compared to the main code, which I think is a mistake, by the way. And I actually think that from a security, we should be championing the creation and the evolution of test environments, because it's an area that doesn't have a lot of space. There's not a lot of players. Everybody agrees that they want a better test environment. They don't tend to fund it. We should actually fund it because we have access to budgets, right? And we basically means that we view it as one of our mandates to be able to have a better test suite, which we can
test in a box.
Sorry?
Test in a box, or just funding for testing?
Well, I'm saying that, look, so take for example, a requirement that says, you want to have cookies, right? Well, a nice one, a bit more complicated. We want to make sure that every single API endpoint, right, that is public, and we want to make sure that every endpoint that is private, right? In order to run that test, the first question is, hey, can you give me a list of all your endpoints, right? That's usually the first problem there, right? If you have that, give me a list of every single authorization mapping for those endpoints. And then you need to run a test, which is basically a bunch of GET requests that you need state to connect it. Now, immediately just to do that, you need a very mature or a decent test environment, or you need a framework that supports that, right? I think we should champion that, because the good news of this is if you have one of these for Express, guess what? The next guys who develop Express, they don't need to invent the wheel. There's already an action that knows how to extract the API's endpoints from Express, knows how to run the tests, knows how to log in, or maybe you teach that little module, and that checks ASVS 1.7 free, right? And now you have a repeatable model. So we should embrace the fact that the test frameworks sometimes are not very mature, because look, the bottom line is that when they are mature, this is not a problem. it's that simple, right? The few cases I found a really mature test API, it was a breeze, because I was literally writing my security requirements on top of their existing test code.
So if we take, for example, the Forrest engine inside GCP, you can write that number of battery of tests and automate it by default, and having compliance or seeing whatever goes into any stage and see if it diverges from what you define the norm. And the norm is that contract that you define. And you can apply that contract to each environment. And that's what we translated. At least we took SIS as a best practice for cloud, and we converted a number of rules in Forrest, but you can do that in any kind of other environment to translate a number of battery of tests of rules. But that's applicable for the cloud. On-prem, it's very, very hard. So unless you take, for example, we could take a stand and say, we write battery of tests of rules that are applicable to a test environment in the cloud for the MVP, VP, and P. That could be a good action, but that covers the environment, that covers half of the environment. Doesn't cover the code, but covers where the code runs.
So that brings up the purpose of the testing. I mean, you can't just do security testing or have a DevSecOps pipeline for the sake of it. There's got to be a business reason or whatever. Are we trying to target the idea of assurance or minimizing risk, or are we trying to just simply help developers produce secure programs? Because I mean, that's the sort of, if you're thinking about creating a DevSecOps program at OWASP, we need to have a focus and bring the tools that we may already have, and then understand, are we trying to do an assurance program, like run vulnerability management and focus on that end? Or are we trying to help developers build secure programs, in which case we focus more on the left-hand side?
I think
do threat modeling.
I think both. I agree both.
I can't believe I've got to the age now where I'm literally on a Friday afternoon saying policy is pretty good. And
you're getting old, man.
Right? Shit has changed badly. Where did I go wrong? But it's true.
Compliance is good. Compliance is good.
Look,
That's
I'm getting
what
grey hair. It means I'm becoming a policy person, getting grey hair. But it's kind of, we do need that, right? They both need to sit there, and I think that's, for me, that would be an ideal goal for OWASP. The original goal was always to help developers. Back when there was this new thing called World Wide Web, and we're like, my God, these things called web applications are cool. But now it's like, as we've matured, I see the developer and the policy procedure GRC type thing also being really important, because it's two go hand to hand, and I feel good saying that.
But Andrew, like the beauty of OWASP, right? I think we have to be careful here, right? Like at OWASP, right? You don't control what they do, right? It's like the beauty of OWASP is a gigantic community that does research, right? It's almost
I see Jim Manico from the back popping here and there.
exactly. But what's neat of OWASP is you cover the whole pipeline, right? And I think what's beauty of this is to be able to say, depending where you are on that pipeline, right? You pick that project, or you pick that thing, you pick that dude, or you pick that guy over there, right? And depending on your maturity, you do that. Almost what you want is roadmaps, right? Is maps that tell you, depending on the maturity where you are, grab here, right? What I like about tests is that tests allow you to have a level of granularity, right? You can have a first test, which is like, look, just have a ping to make sure your website is alive. Just have a ping to make sure you don't have secrets in your source code, right? Like you can have very vanilla tests, which are very simple, but even just putting those tests in there is very challenging.
So I think what Yusuf faced, and I think what I really agree, is a maturity matrix for the whole program that is effectively SAM, that maps back to SAM and BSIM, but on steroids. That takes all these other elements into account.
Well, and ASVS and the stuff, right? So when you
and then we expand.
So, if you think
I have a draft of that. I have a draft that I can share. Actually, it does exactly that. So I'm happy to share it.
In the comments, released it. Yeah.
Maybe. I need to clean it up with all the proprietary stuff, but I promise I'll release it.
So we've got 45 minutes left, and I guess kind of the consensus I'm getting at the moment is that we're almost making a big push to expand upon the idea of actions, so that actions can be used by not only people who use GitHub, but everybody else. And they kind of break down all the various OWASP tools that we currently have and the ones that we don't have. And I'm getting a lot of tools that we don't have. And I think that would be another session. Is that
all the mapping? I like your idea how you broke down the various stages and which tool does fits in which stage, because I think we're missing the graphical representation of which OWASP tool does fits in where. And I think that will be, even if we just one action, it will be one action of actions. It will be one brilliant picture to say, where do I use which tool and where? And then we can discuss, okay, this is the complexity of missing and integration. But also, I keep on pushing back on a big picture that I'll try to share to show kind of a skeleton of a program, of an AppSec program, and how do you do it? And what element do you consider mature, like maturity 1 and maturity 5? What is the difference? And I kind of agree and disagree with Dennis that the tests are the same. So for me, the stuff that you do on maturity 1 is very, very different than you do on maturity 5. And it's not maybe more, but it's literally different things. But open up to a debate. I'm often wrong.
Like, there's no comparison. Like, it's the maturity is critical. Look, Paul that's here is a perfect example, right? Paul, is interested in security, has support for security, is a security architect, has development team working. He needs to arrive at OWASP and basically,
where do I start?
Right? And go, where do I go? Right? And that's it, right? Like until we nail, the path of somebody like Paul, that, in fact, this is the other thing going to your level, right? Paul is actually involved in multiple projects. So actually, in one of the projects, he might be able to go for level 3, but in other projects, he might need to go for level 1 because of the state of the...
I agree. And the money and the people.
Exactly.
And I had project at different stage, and it's fine, it's completely fine. But then you say every project needs to at least meet the minimum to be a level 1, and then to be, the shiny project needs to be a level 3.
The risk, it's all about risk. So Andrew, when you said that, do you focus on risk versus secure? I'm now with Daniel, that I feel my age, and I say this is not about secure applications.
Okay, the risk appetite of a CISO is benchmarking a level 1, the non-risky, the de-risk. Maybe you can do more aggressive stuff if you're maturing number 3. Maybe you can do development and be more control. And that's one of the control that we applied. So we did very strict check for people that were a maturity number 1 and much loose. So go out and evaluate your library, do whatever you want. I know I have a proxy, I know I have a gateway, I know I can enforce blocking for specific dependency. I know that at that level, I can break the pipeline. So I'm much more relaxed. So go out, do whatever the fuck you want because you're maturity level 3. If you fuck up, you roll back. So incident and checks that like the double half quarter. So if I see a consistent creep in number of vulnerability, then you roll back up. But everything hinge on the maturity and the trust that you give to people for the maturity. So it's kind of, you develop a contract based on the maturity level where you can do more or less. But that's agreed with the CISO because that's the risk appetite of the whole organization.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing some basic four thrusts. Where do I start? How do I use each tool? What tools do we have? Second is actions, tests, design code, dependency testing. Third is a skeleton of a program based around the SAM model. And then metrics and visibility.
And BSIM, SAM and BSIM.
Nah, don't go with BSIM. SAM is good.
Come on. I have the mapping. I've done the mapping already. I've done the legwork. So don't worry about it.
BSIM is a measurement model and SAM is a maturity model. So they can be hand in hand and both are good in their own way.
There are gaps in areas. There are gaps in areas where certain question answer BSIM, certain question OWASP doesn't call. So I've done already the mapping, so we can debate around the mapping.
You can share it.
And some sort of
I will share it, I promise you. You give me access to the dev team for doing the vulnerability management, I'll share it.
So, go for it.
Yeah, Andrew, I just wanted to interject something. It's like, I like BSIM and SAM as models, but they are still very much maturity models, and they apply globally, maybe to what we're doing. The problem I've run into of late is translating, what we'll call them the security initiatives around releasing secure code into practical measurables for gating. So trying to apply that we have a certain set of policies in place, yes, but I want to translate those into something a little bit more technical, which I can automate to kind of flag code as not passing gate A, or flag code as not.
Yeah, I don't want to be in a position where we're the people who say no. If we start saying to a business that you can't deploy this code automatically, then essentially we're going to get ignored. And the same thing that I have a bit of a problem with is, in the old days, they used to have change control boards, and I used to call them change prevention boards because they were primarily there to stop change. If someone's deploying 100 times a day, we need to be able to have a process in place that allows 100 times a day to be deployed on the majority of times. But yeah, some sort of automation for practical gating is a good idea. I think that's a really practical thing to do. My only concern with BSIM is that it's self-referential in the same way the OWASP top 10 is, and it seems to produce the same sort of results every time they've updated from BSIM 9 to BSIM 10. It still looks sort of like BSIM 7. And I'm worried that we might be baking in a non-DevSecOps maturity model in the form of BSIM, which is, they want a security group, they want security champions and things like that may not necessarily be scalable. So what do people think about that? I mean, if we start aligning ourselves with BSIM, it comes with some baggage.
Yeah, and we shut down. We see which one is elective for the overall mapping. So I selected certain things that were good. Even SAM, the governance part is, I think, I didn't like enormously the governance section of SAM and how it was structured. And I'm referring to SAM number 1. I haven't looked at number 2. But on BSIM, it's the same thing. So we create effectively a meta structure that then maps back. So we have the traceability. So the maturity model, and we decide, okay, for an AppSec program, we take the skeleton that already existing and we extract the element. Like I have a bunch of stuff on design that doesn't map into the governance or other areas. Education, people, that is the stuff, Andrew, that you just mentioned. Like all that stuff doesn't map to anywhere else, but it don't matter. I have a meta framework that maps to other frameworks. That's why I said I did a lot of mapping, because then we can create our own set of questionnaire that people can answer that then maps to our framework and then map back eventually to SAM and BSIM if we wanted to, where is applicable. And we can create new things and kill new stuff. But that's the beauty, because then we can map also too, because the framework and the maturity model was too generic. What I want to create or what I'm proposing to create is something that also map tools or suggestion of tools for OWASP, like where the NetTacker fits, or where does, if you want a DAS fit, that can be translated in NetTacker, or a library of a battery of tests, or a developer contract, or the label and tag, or things like that.
Yeah.
Or where metric and KCI. And the other element that I've introduced is metrics maps to maturity. So at maturity number 1, I never thought about measuring vulnerability and breaking the pipeline. At a very high maturity level, I have KCI that are mapped to that maturity level. And I did that for very little things.
Yeah, so
that's
they
a very
just...
important point. So, sorry, I just really want this one. Everything, when you create a guidance, will need to be a bit customized, right? Like so when I did another OpenSAM MVC implementation, I did exactly the same thing. I took the guide and we rewrote
I'll show it.
Maturity, right? So I think it's very important to understand that even when you provide something, the customization of that, especially because you need a security team on the other side to digest it, that's what they're going to do, right? Because you need to adjust it. So for example, what we did was we took the levels of SAM, for example, we actually took away all the levels and we asked, what are we currently doing in your organization? And that was level 1, right? Level 2 is what we want them to do next year. And level 3 was what we're going to look after that. And then you have a roadmap. So we actually had things that in SAM and BC was level 3 that we had a level 1. Simply because that part, the company had nailed it, right? The company had totally nailed it, security automation and dependency checking. Freaking out, amazing. So actually, that's the baseline for everybody, right?
So that's one of the things I was about to suggest is just because I just want to bring out that they're working on standardizing the way you can do dependency management to actually use the same tools across many things. It sounds like we need a standard mechanism to document governance models, because someone who's using SharePoint as a public website that's only read-only is a very different one from a health system that uses SharePoint in a health setting, and yet they're the same program. So we need some way of annotating a program in a standardized way to allow actions to determine the governance model. And, I worry about the fact that if you've got 1,400 apps and you need to annotate each one of them, they won't be. Anyway, that was my statement. I'm happy to take, challenge, please.
I think you just freaked us out saying governance at 15:25 in front. Just saying. No, but I agree with you. I think that's a lot of work.
It is.
That's a hell of a
Start small, man. Take 5 things from ASVS. Take 5 things from the top.
It can be iterative, right? As long as we agree on a framework, we can do releases and we can do iteration.
In fact, look, take a look at the session that Mario just did on compliance as code, right? The guy did a great job at describing ASVS requirements as a story. And I think, Thomas, your comment, I think, was you to talk about user stories and talk about, going to that is key, right? Because that you're actually following the business, right? So if you take those use cases, right, then we have something usable. Right. And I think that's the challenge to the community. Right. So if you go to the OWASP community, I would say package your tools, package your guidance into GitHub Actions, into something I can run off a Docker container.
I just need to run a print off somewhere, so I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Let me see. What is the password of the meeting? I'll show you the framework instead of talking about it.
Yeah. Well, you can join. You can share screen.
Yeah, but I'm on the iPad, so I want to join from the PC, but we put the password in to avoid. If you can share the password, I'll join from PC.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll put the details there. By the way, check out the link I just put on the chat, which is another cool project that Ben was leading, and he actually open sourced it during the summit, which is he's trying to do a mapping between 5 different frameworks. So he can find correlation between all of them. He actually done it already, right? So he basically is saying, I'm having to comply with all these freaking things. I want to know for every action I do, where does that map to ISO 27000 core bits. You know, acting as SAM is there. So it's really cool. Check out that project. All right, so the meeting ID is
No,
done.
I have the ID. I just need the password.
The password is 7. Can you see it if I put it here?
Yeah.
Yep. 76508. Yeah, Dockerize it, bring it to actions. That way we can scale.
Okay.
Can I jump in with the interesting use case I had at a previous client? So the actual problem wasn't either budget or tooling, because that was all in place, but the problem was the manpower that was used to do the actual security verification. So either manual testing, guidance of the project, etc. And kind to solve that problem, we constructed some kind of risk score that actually told, okay, how well is a project doing, and how high is the chance that something will go wrong. And on one side, that consists of the developer checklist. So are you modifying a framework using another framework, typical ones? Are you creating new user flows, new endpoints, etc.? Or are you modifying any critical components like security components, etc.? Then other things like, are you adding in new open source dependencies that we need to verify? For, of course, I would heighten the score again. What security maturity level are you? 1 will have a much higher score than 3, because you know more things should get catched. And also an interesting one was that how many vulnerabilities were there disclosed over time for the size of the code. So if you have a typical project that's renowned to where there are a lot of recurrences of vulnerabilities, that should have a higher score as well than a very large project that never has any vulnerabilities over time as well. And then some other triggers like calling some threshold, some trigger functions where you specify some kind of blacklist. And in most of the cases that actually tackled the whole scaling thing a bit, because then we knew where to look first and how to prioritize our budget for manual pen testing itself.
Yeah. So Dan, I just want to make sure, oh, he's disappeared again. I just want to make sure we've got time to look at our outcomes, because we need to document them and run through them and make sure that we've got sort of a consensus that we've actually achieved these.
I've given up on sharing. The meeting is locked, so we made it so secure that I can't get back in.
So, Dennis, are you helping? Is it? I can see Dan in the corner there. Okay, hi Dan.
I'm trying to have breakfast.
Okay. As I was saying, we've got like half an hour left, and I'd like to lead. I'd like us to have a bit more discussion, but we've got to actually summarize our outcomes, and then they will record our outcomes as a separate bit. So let's talk a bit longer, and then probably at 1:45 point, we've got to summarize our results here. And then, as I said, they will want to record us and put that into a outcome session.
Cool. So if I go over the ones that I already mentioned during the start, we've covered a few of them, how teams use OWASP tools and pipelines. We've talked about keeping pipelines stable and reliable. The two harder ones, making it easier to integrate tools, the biggest one being ZAP. And I think that's an ongoing problem that a lot of people face. And then two that could be clumped together, I feel, reducing false positives and general noise, and how to make developers' lives easier. I know in my experience, I think everybody else, nothing adds more annoyance than friction. And if you look at a lot of the modern security tools, they just make development lives horrible, because you end up with so many false positives, which means you lose faith in the tools themselves, and they're a mess. Now, I don't know if that's possible to fix those two so easily in the pipeline itself. Maybe with smaller actions and tools. But maybe we can talk about that now. Or does everybody else want to talk about how we can make it easier to integrate some of the current OWASP tools?
I have thoughts. I would personally like to reduce the friction to improve adoption. So making devs' lives easier, I think it should be one of the higher priorities, because at the moment, all too often our tools assume a security mindset. Now, Dennis, you've produced the O2 framework, and I must admit, I tried several times to try and use it, and I was flummoxed. I can only imagine what developers thought. I think, it was a great tool, but it was hidden underneath an UX that was just, oh my God, what?
It was dentist. We literally coined that as a noun. You've been dentist. What the hell? What the? Yeah, amazing tool.
I needed the cloud at the time to make it more smooth and look, it's a good example, right? If I had to be able to create a lot of those things as mini actions, right, mini components, it would have been so much more usable, right? So in a way, that UI was an attempt to kind of package a lot of those 100 or 150 mini components that exist under the hood, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think probably concentrating a little bit on making it easy to find the information on where do I start, and then making devs' lives easier. So adopting a tool or a process or a governance model is easy and frictionless, or at least as friction-free as possible. There's going to be some friction, because I think, if we try to put barriers to entry in there because we want to have every single switch under the sun to cover off all these different use cases, I'd rather consider, for example, we talked about Express and automatically deriving routes to create access control tests. I think that's a really good idea. And if it was relatively automatic and therefore low friction for the developers, it would be adopted quite significantly, I think. So I personally believe making devs' lives easier and improving the quality of the results, so reducing false positives, should be our two elements that we should concentrate on. But that's just my personal opinion. There's like 10 of us on this call, so love to hear alternative views.
If you break the tooling down to smaller tools, and so they're doing tighter checks on the smaller aspects, then by definition your number of switches is going to drop down, which would then make it easier to integrate. And so you may end up with your pipeline making more calls with more tools, but each one is going to be more specific, and that may make it more flexible to cover more circumstances.
So I've been toying with that idea of moving away from these monolithic tools that we have that does everything, and building little helpers. Myself and Adam Maxwell at work have done this. Bear with me a second. The wife has been buying a lot on eBay recently. It's annoying.
Whilst Dan stepped out for a moment, I really like the enabling engineering or enabling development as an approach, with some of the tools that we're talking about as well. So routes from Express, et cetera, you start to be able to use that information for validation of threat models of code. So you can, as we add more of these base tests, we're potentially going to be able to add a lot of additional security value on top. So yeah, a new route turns up, but you don't have any tests for it. It wasn't part of your it's not part of your threat modeler's code. Sounds like someone needs to look at that. So I really, small, simple, that you can then build on, but and enabling engineering at the same time is I like.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if we look at, let's take DAST, right? Everybody has this thing where DAST is going to run. The problem with a lot of modern DAST tools is they take hours. And everybody who's ever tried to get that into a pipeline will know that that just doesn't fly anymore. Like, you can't tell any modern org, hey, we're going to do a DAST scan, so the pipeline needs to stop for a good 4 hours, or we need to do a branch, and like, nah, it works. So almost what you want is you need little mini DAST things. So AMAS do directory scanning. then an XSS scanner, then a SQL injection scanner, and so on and so on, and break it down where you say, right at the start of the project, I'm not accepting any input that has any kind of interaction with the database. All right, I don't need SQL injection tester. Or I'm not doing anything that would have some kind of user input coming back where XSS might be a problem. You almost need that little granularity where at the start of the build, you can say, listen, I only want to do X, Y, and Z. Off you go and smash on. I don't think there's anything like that at the moment, and it could be quite a cool summer of code project for somebody wanting to create something, small little scanner.
So what about the idea of writing the ASVS test as a single test that just,
Level one.
Yeah, just does that one test and one test only, but really well.
Okay, I will add that. I like that. I assume we can. It's the quietest I've heard Dennis in 17 years.
So
I assume this would be a.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's an ASVS test, SVS as a test. One, right? And that actually just one has a freaking tree behind it. But let's start with that. That is the future. Sorry, Daniel.
I guess a lot of this will come into Summer of Code as well. Where we
might have missed, we might have missed this year's Summer of Code though.
Okay. Fine.
Yep.
Actually, why don't you do a fundraise for that? Right? Look,
we're probably going to have
projects. You can go to companies and say, who wants to chip in to sponsor this, right?
It's also about the availability of students, masters and grads to actually do the work. So that's one of the reasons why it is done during the summer. But the Australian summer and South African summer is coming up. So,
and all the schools have stopped. Nobody's at school at the moment. So they're all sitting around playing Fortnite, I've been told.
Yes. And I know this is not a good thing. In fact, this is there's a couple of people that are helping with the summer that's been furloughed, right? And there's a number of people, like we haven't even got close to the financial hit of this whole thing. And there's a number of people, there's a lot of very talented people in the next 3 months are going to be looking for jobs, right? And actually, they are an amazing pool. And in fact, I would argue that working on that project will make them more employable. So look, I think the talent pool is there, right? We just need to create the project. And actually will help individuals, right? Like there's, if you must lose your job because of this, nothing wrong with you, but just the company went under, or, you work for a theater, right? Or a cinema, right? Then this is a great project to do, right?
Okay. I just want Andre to just highlight, he wrote something to us and says, I think you might need to revisit your goal. Andre, could you just highlight what you meant there? And we've got to start summarizing our outcomes here and then wrap out. But Andre, could you just highlight what you meant?
I have a lot of noise here, Andrew. That's why I actually had to write it down rather than coming to the mic. I don't actually see security as making life. There you go. Can you hear that? I hope not.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
As long as you can hear me. It's more, one of the things that I actually felt that was missing throughout my career as a developer, right, was that security was not an afterthought. It was like only existing if it needed to exist. Not only because of business limitations, but also because, well, mostly business limitations, pressure of time, lack of budget, etc. And to be able to speak the same language as a developer, I do understand the perspective from the top, because that's where I'm leaning towards as well, career-wise. But it's a different vocabulary. The concerns are slightly different. They are more down to that specifically an if clause that I can actually work out for whatever reason. And to bring it down to that level, and you guys were, and I couldn't actually interact with you guys then, when you're discussing tools and the way that you actually put it across a pipeline, I've tried different approaches throughout my career in different market verticals that I got the opportunity to work in. And test-driven development was there, behavior-driven development was there, and I worked with a lot of great professionals, and I learned a lot. But security guys were almost at the end, and if you tried to interact with them, it was like, go away. And I'm a security kind of guy now, and I don't like that. What I've been trying to find, I've discovered a lot from all of the videos that I during all of the sessions that we've been having, is that you all had already experiences that I thought of implemented in my head if I got the opportunity, and they have failed. And I would like to I would love to learn a lot more. Why did they actually fail? And why can't you get closer to people that are willing and wanting to learn more? You know, and trying to collaborate there and give you something that you could actually use, but I don't actually have it. But anyway, getting back to that point, it's more, don't think that you're actually going to make their life easiest, because I don't think you will. It will be like challenging a junior, you don't understand this, but let me talk, walk you through this. And they will like you after that, because they will feel empowered. So it's more like, I'm here to help you, but you really need to understand this bit.
Yeah, so just recapping, essentially, it won't be easier for them, but what I was really trying to achieve, just to highlight where I was trying to go with that, is it's really hard to integrate security tools at the moment. They're often not consumed by the developers themselves. I was really trying to aim for the tools should be developer focused, and even though it's going to create them more work, it should be easier for them to use those tools and understand and how to actually, mold them to their needs, rather than just simply say, this is a silver bullet, it's going to run at this stage and we'll stop you going live. I think we need to make it easier for them. But I do understand your point of view, because I've seen plenty of programs fail because they integrated too late, or they integrated at a place that made it so difficult for developers to get their job done, and they just bypassed.
I experienced that now. Like the thing I'm turning now is guardrails. As a kid of the 70s, bowling was very cool. And the idea is you spin up the guardrails, and no matter what you do, the ball's going to get down the end and knock some pins out. For me, that's a modern pipeline. I don't necessarily want, and I did think this way, and it was stupid and immature of me. I don't think developers need to learn all the security tools out there. That world just doesn't exist. Like, give up on it. Developers need to sling amazing code, and we either help him, them, her, she, it via the IDE, or when they push code into the pipeline, that's when we have these little guardrails that say, hey, this is a bad thing, and this is why it's a bad thing. And you learn from that, not saying, you should know that there's an LFR in this code. Like, no, they shouldn't. Like, I'm sorry, that world doesn't exist.
I see it like engineering. Not every single builder needs to be a great engineer. They need to be a good builder who has access to a great engineer. And that's the scalability problem that we probably face as an industry.
So maybe one of the outcomes is I've got two here. Well, one is create a graphic that shows an ideal reference pipeline, and ideally what tools are needed in each stage. Now, this could very quickly turn into a vendor sausage fest, and I'm very nervous about that, because there's a lot of sausages out there, and I don't know how we handle that. But would that be something of use?
Could you just instead of actual tools, types of tools?
Yeah, I think so. If I take, so tell my art background. So kind of my idea is you have the pipeline like this, and we get somebody who's very good at graphics, and we almost break down, say, for a build thing, right? You have something for Docker, you've got something for this and that. We don't necessarily name whatever. We just say, ideally, your tool should be doing this. For the notify stage, I love the doctor analogy. It should be doing X, Y, and Z. Like, would that be of use to people?
Yeah.
But I think that already exists, right? I've seen variations of that. I think what's valuable is you do that with OWASP tools and guidance, right? And then if you have a gap, you're going, oh, we need something here. Yeah, you can put areas, right? But I feel that it's, because you will become a sausage fest. Like, look.
Yeah, I know, but I think in the years of doing this, there's a lot of misconception as to what a pipeline should look like.
Yeah. So create the pipeline.
And we have areas. We say, right now, OWASP does this, but it's missing all of this, right?
No. So what I've read is you create the pipeline, we add the areas, but you populate it with OWASP projects or the components of the OWASP projects that help in each of those areas.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Right? And then what you do is you might find guidance, right? You might find guidance, or maybe it might be very revealing that ZAP can only be used here, where actually it will add a lot of value here, but at the moment it's not usable at the beginning of the because of that.
Can we take QShop and put that into a pipeline? You know, we have ourselves a vulnerable app. We build a sample pipeline around it.
Yeah, it's already got a container. Yeah, it's already got a container, and it's already got a test suite running under Protractor that already runs a bunch of tests. So functional and security tests as well. So it's a good candidate.
And this one, let's adopt this app. It's really good. COVID Safe Paths app. It's open source. It does contact tracing. It's relevant to all of us. It's privacy first, right? It's, you know, the guys are engaged and they're trying to work with OWASP, right? You know, they're part of the summit. Let's work with them. You know, I think like this is the thing, like Juice Shop is cool. And I think Juice Shop is a good workflow. And I think absolutely is a rough implementation. This is a real world app with real world challenges, with actually real world code, real world complexity is perfect. And they want to help, literally. Look, I'm having a session literally in an hour where the topic of the session is using OWASP at their, you know, COVID Safe Paths apps, right? So there's a perfect environment for us to be involved with.
All right, we've got 10 minutes left. Andrew, what do you think?
I think we've done a lot of good discussion here. I think we've actually worked out roughly the way that we take OWASP from its current state to somewhere we might have some form of where do I start? And I think there's lots of work for the future as well. I think if we put some early, like these are the outcomes that we should work on first, then these are the maturity levels that we'd like to work on next, because obviously writing every single ASVS test is going to be years of work. Areas for future research, such as Google Summer of Code. And then lastly, I think we've talked about a lot of different things. So maybe if we concentrate on 4 or 5 real outcomes that we could achieve by, say, this time next year. Dennis, I mean, how often are you running these project summits? Is it once a year?
No, well, the on-site summit is once a year. By the way, we already got the venue for next year because we just deferred from this year. But I think it would be good to do more regular, right? I think it's a question of whether we can get enough energy, right? I was very happy with the way it worked this year, right? I think we got great conversations. So yeah, look, you know, I'm more than happy to help to organize another session, right? Is in a couple of, you know, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. It's almost like whenever, you know, there's a good energy. Let's do it, right? Absolutely.
Okay.
Where can this conversation, like where the conversations for this and around it and like whatever organizational process would be there, where would all of this be kept?
It sounds like there's going to need to be a OWASP project created as a placeholder, and we can put it into GitHub as a trackable issue with the wiki. I think where do we start is probably an overarching project that can link to other OWASP projects. It doesn't have to do every single thing itself. Like, you know, the diagram that Daniel showed before. But I think we've talked about OWASP actions, essentially small actions based around ASVS. I think it's very concrete, very doable, small projects. A skeleton of a program, a reference implementation. Do we see that as being part of number 1? Okay. We talked about metrics. I think this is an area that we do need to be able to do and drive some visibility into the AppSec program so people can see this is the investment I'm making, this is the improvement I'm getting, and be able to see that over time. All too often, security programs are bottomless pits of money that doesn't really show any sort of, you know, advancement. So something that we can help with is to understand, does OWASP have any projects along those lines? And we talked about a governance model. Dan, what was anything else that we mentioned here that we need to sort of consider?
I think the only one's missing is making it easy for everybody to find out how to do each phase of a pipeline.
Okay. Do we make that an attribute of a reference pipeline implementation?
Yeah, I think so. I like the idea of the Juice app or the COVID Safe Path app. That's quite nice. Because I think the more, like I said, the more I deal with people, the more there's a lot of misconceptions of what pipelines are. And it'd be great to visually explore this, to say, this is what it is. Here's how everything slots in.
Yeah, and it can also be a testing ground for like GitHub Actions and things like that.
But then reach out to the DevSecOps community, right? And even the DevOps community. They already got this, right? Like literally, that's.
I know. I think that's where I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the day job. That's a mature market. It's now taking that and making it so it's more security focused as well.
In fact, check the sessions from Mohammed at the summit, right? Again, like the guy, you know, okay, he has a product, but he has done a lot of great thinking and a lot of great, you know, thought leadership on the whole DevSecOps, right? And the missing piece is what you say initially. It was like there's a lot of proprietary tools at the other end that prevent that from happening. And not to say that they are not important, but at the moment, if they're the only one that works in the space, they prevent that space from actually being operational. So OWASP has a great role to play there.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think one thing you should think of doing is almost do a call to arms at OWASP. So what I would do is that once you got this done, I would literally just do a half-day OWASP sort of, you know, session where you literally present this and you know, almost say, look, OWASP leaders and OWASP members, right? You got the moving pieces are kind of here, right? If you can even throw a little bit of budget into the Summer of Code or some developers or even do an open call for sponsorships, I think you have a lot of the leaders and a lot of the talent pool already at OWASP to pull this off.
I agree. We have got a couple of minutes left.
You guys can stay here for the next hour if you want. It's okay.
We know, Dennis. This is why we love you. We know. Your wedding was a week-long affair.
Wasn't you weren't there?
Anything from anybody else that we've not heard from?
I mean, I definitely. Oh, you've heard from me. Never mind.
We can hear again. There's nothing wrong with that.
I definitely would love to be able to be a part of this and a part of the meetings that that go into this. I don't know. Do you have to actually be an OWASP member? I'm not currently, but do you have to actually be one to be able to be a part of all of that?
I'm not even an OWASP member, and I guess that's bad.
That is bad, but anyway, no. As a project contributor, you don't need to be an OWASP member. I am a lifetime member, but yeah, plenty of project leaders, chapter leaders and whatnot are not OWASP members.
Okay.
Cool. So Dan, we do need to record the outcomes. So it looks like you've got a little list there. So how about we call this to a close and then we do the recording with Alana?
Yeah, cool. Very much, all. That was an enjoyable 2 hours, and I really mean that. That was very except for the weird 10 minutes of men in bathtubs. That wasn't enjoyable. I'm not gonna lie. No, that's I need to get some bleach on my head now.
Although it was the first time, I think. We've been sharing the Zoom links. I was quite careful in the beginning, like, you know, is it going to backfire? But it never happened. So I guess there was always have to
typical with us. Thanks very much. Yeah, cheers.
No, it happens. It's my fault. It happened to us twice on CSA. So that's why we closed the link or we drop on StreamYard.
Yeah.
Cool. But thank you all, and look forward to speaking to everybody soon.
Yeah, thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, organizers. So I'm going to stop the live now. And then we're going to start the debrief. Hello?
G'day.
You're still live.